We are live, MythVision podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, I never would have dreamed, literally a decade ago, of even flirting with the idea of a title for a YouTube video saying Satan was right. Just the very essence of the superstition of saying those words coming back to bite me, as if God might actually, attack me, curse me, something like that, was a real reality in my head. It actually would have been something that I was probably cursing a kid or possibly a future situation going wrong in my life because, well, I'm on the bad guys team now, it seems. Of course, we're going to be talking about this documentary called Satan's Guide, specifically to the Bible. I actually spoke to the producer who created this documentary before it went viral on YouTube. I was in the works with Satan himself. That's right. I've been in cahoots with the guy for a little bit now. Now, there's going to be some people watching this who are actually going to think that I'm being literally telling you this, and they're going to believe this. That's the kind of mindset that's in the head of some people who watch MythVision. There are going to be responses to this response, most likely. I'm pretty positive, because we're going to be laying it on thick and hopefully not beating around the bush, letting you know what we honestly think about this documentary, as well as the state of the scholarship pertaining to the Bible, from Old to New Testament. Without further ado, I want to introduce our guest. I have three joining me today, a trinity of sorts. It's a reverse trinity of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You could equate them as an upside-down cross. We're getting pretty heretical pretty quickly here, but I hope you could stay tuned, enjoy, and subscribe to all their YouTube channels. The links are in the description. With that being said, welcome to MythVision.
It was a terrible movie.
What just happened, man?
There was no mention of Egyptian loan words.
Oh, hey, I got Dr. Kill, I got Dr. Joshua Bowen, and then I have my good friend Paul Davidson.
I mean, you had me. I don't know that I'm here anymore, but
I know that was a heck of an intro there, Kipp.
Sorry, guys.
This is the documentary we're talking about, Satan's Guide on YouTube. I am quite impressed with the amount of subscribers from one documentary in just a couple of shorts. So 33,000 subscribers from one movie. And then there's the trailer. But Satan's Guide to the Bible, if you haven't watched it, it's fun. It's got some songs that are going to stay in your head. I'm going to let it shine. That's been in my head all day.
As my friend Apologia said, we all just wish we're the ones who made this documentary.
Right. It's just, this documentary's been in the works for over a decade. To give some people context to this, the works that have been being done by Satan himself predates MythVision and the critical stuff that we've been doing on YouTube in this way. And I find it interesting that some people thought, I think you told me this, Kipp, that I made this video or something. Was that you?
I heard from one person at least who was suspicious that you might have been the creator.
Got it. Well, it makes sense in light of critical scholars coming on and just laying it on thick as to what is going on with the Bible. And so I definitely want to get into that. We're going to get into some sections. It's too long for us to review tonight. Dr. Josh, has a certain time restriction, and I think Kent Hoven's supposed to be visiting Josh sometime here in a little bit.
He's been popping up stairs recently, so
So when Kent Hoven comes by, do you have to go? Is that it? You have to go hang out.
Well, I mean, it's not that he really
Dino
comes by, right? Like, he's been crashing in our basement for about 2 years now, but
Right. Okay.
just if he comes upstairs, it becomes a problem. They're getting back down there.
We have to hide the kids.
Okay.
Keep him away from the kids. Yeah. So subscribe to Inquisitive Bible Reader. Subscribe to Kipp Davis. I mean, literally, I'd love to spend more time, but we do want to get into the review and have some fun with all of you, giving our honest thoughts, lay it on there thick. And if you have any problems, we're going to try and express what we may have said differently or whatever. So subscribe to my friend Paul Davidson, Kipp Davis, and of course, Megan Lewis runs the channel, which is why the channel is so fabulous.
That's right.
But Joshua Bowen, of course, is also in cahoots with Digital Hammurabi, as well as has written many books and has some on the way. Recently did the Old Testament Endorsed Slavery, Volume 2, 2nd edition. And you got to get some of the books that he has. Also courses on MVP courses. Kipp Davis did pretty much real ancient Israelite religion, taking you into what it would have been like back then. So that being said, I think it's...
Oh.
Oh my God.
Wow. Have you watched Dune Part 2, guys?
That's a good question to answer.
I'm sure Rob's going to talk about it for 40 minutes.
Okay, Rob. We see you. Okay, enough joking around. Satan's guide here. Do we want to jump in head first into Egypt, Exodus, or do we want to comment first before we play anything?
I mean, it's probably worthwhile maybe just saying something about the documentary to start with. As I saw it, and the reason I really liked it, beyond the fact that it's very entertaining and incredibly well produced. The thing that I loved so much about it was that this was a documentary about critical biblical scholarship. And there's just not enough of those, right? I thought it was a very nice way of presenting to people who may not be overly familiar with modern biblical scholarship, or even the difference between modern biblical scholarship and theology, or the difference between what scholars do and what pastors do. I thought this was a really nice, very digestible introduction to the kind of work that scholars do, why they do it, and where this takes us.
And the thing that's, I think, really important to say, and not that obviously I haven't memorized all the things that he covers in the video.
I did. I don't know what you're doing.
Sorry, guys. I'm not Kipp Davis. So, but I mean, I don't remember watching the video and thinking, I don't know, that seems a little fringe, or that seems like a minority position in the field. I just don't remember that coming up. In fact, very, very frequently thinking to myself, yeah, this is just what scholars say about this, right? So it's been funny to me to watch different apologists try to come at this.
Right.
And they it's just, I know we say it all the time, right, Kipp, when we're in these circles, guys, this isn't something that's really up for debate in the field. This is just what scholars say about it. So
it's definitely propaganda, though, you would say.
Yes,
right?
well, I mean, obviously that.
Of course, as long as we know that. Paul, what's your comments on it before we start?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to see a video in the genre of critical biblical studies that has this level of quality, this level of care and thought put into it. The writing is fantastic, the jokes are funny, and that's going to engage regular people the way almost nothing else in this area will. And like Kipp and Apology the other day said, we all kind of wish we had made a video like this. It's like,
that's a good point.
It's hitting the spot I think that Bart Ehrman hit with his popular books years and years ago. It's really approachable. I had a good time watching it.
I loved it. I'll just to say up front, Richard C. Miller actually introduced me to the man behind the mask, and I was really thankful to be involved in this. But I think what really interests me, for those who actually watch the documentary, is how quickly the bad guy actually becomes the good guy in this entire documentary, of just trying to tell you the truth. He's not trying to hide anything, and how quickly you realize that there are real academics in the field who are doing historical critical versus what I think these scholars, or these I'll say seminarians are doing, leaving seminary, who say, well, they know this stuff, but as the other apologists throughout all the YouTube experience from this documentary will say, yeah, but they don't mention it because it's not true. We have better scholarship than that, or we disagree with that, like Mike Winger might say. But at the end of the day, what I find interesting is they're doing theology versus what the actual historical cultural situation is. And just to mention with our friend Rob, who made the thumbnail about streaming this stream, saying that he's going to be yawning to the reactions to this, giving him credit, giving him attention. Here's your free publicity, Rob. I just figure it's worth noting that having Michael Heiser say you're doing like witch doctory kind of hermeneutics and exegesis, or witch doctory exegesis, which I suspect he would just say is eisegesis on that thumbnail, is I was reading 1 Corinthians 10, and I just figure why not start with the weirdest theological interpretation Paul himself is the one saying. And what does he do with the Exodus experience? I don't know, some witch doctory. He says, for I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud, that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Now, I don't remember reading anywhere in the Bible, in the original context that I'm reading, where the rock was a guy or even divine.
I just like to picture a guy, whose job for 40 years is to push the wheelbarrow that has the big rock in it.
Here's
right?
Jesus. Yeah. That's theology. That's not historical critical research. And we've said up front, I think all of us, we understand there's going to be several interpretations throughout history. I think even some of our Genesis stuff Rob's responded to in the past has looked at some ways of church fathers spiritualizing and finding Christ in Genesis and all of this kind of stuff. That doesn't seem to be your guys' interest. Is it?
Nope. No. Sorry, I was distracted by the chat. What? I'm sorry.
I wasn't distracted. I'm just ignoring you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. But yeah, theology can be fun on its own to see, but I'm interested in historical stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to recognize, and we say this all the time in these public spaces, that if somebody wants to come to Genesis 3 and say the serpent is Satan, fine. Right. But I think you have to then recognize that they're doing that through an interpretive framework. Right. They have a lens. They're utilizing other textual data. They have presuppositions about the text. And they're reading that essentially back into it. And that's fine. But you just have to be able to distinguish that between what did the author mean, right, when he wrote it? What did it mean in its original context? So, both can be meaningful. Both can be useful. We just have to make sure we keep them distinct.
Isn't it fair to say that that's also the interpretation of Satan, who is the gentleman in the documentary the entire time, the substitute teacher teaching these kids, correct? It's a theological interpretation, is my point, to see him as this evil villain contrary to God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it should be fun.
Let's do it. I'm going to start us off with Exodus. Kipp and Josh wanted to start there. Let's do it. Let me know, pause me, and I will be happy to pause to have your comments.
Act in history in the Old Testament, that's the Exodus.
Freedom.
Liberation.
The Bible says Israelites lived in Egypt for more than 400 years, slaves to the empire. The Bible tells about a great man.
Moses.
That's Moses.
Moses takes on Pharaoh and his empire.
When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand.
Let my people go. The Egyptian Pharaoh did not let go of Moses or his people. More than 2 million Israelites.
You guys are never leaving Egypt, okay? Like never, ever, ever.
So God intervened, attacking Egypt with 10 truly awful plagues. The last plague? killing all firstborn children.
Ouch.
Listen to what the Bible says.
And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt.
Just keep praying.
God's smoting gives the Israelites their chance to finally escape Egypt.
Rise up. Get thee gone. For now.
We out.
But it wasn't long before Pharaoh sent his army to take back the Israelites.
Dumb decision.
On the banks of the Red Sea, the Israelites' quest for freedom has reached a dead end. Moses parts the waters, and more than 2 million Israelites escape Egyptian bondage.
Freedom.
Freedom.
Let my people go.
And now a reading from Dr. Hendel.
As a story of deliverance from oppression, the birth of freedom, the Exodus story has served as a paradigm for over 2.5 millennia.
Paradigm.
Liberation. And freedom. God acting in history.
So the Bible says. But what do biblical scholars say?
There is no archaeological evidence that would support an idea of a historical, large-scale exodus from Egypt.
The Exodus from Egypt never happened?
He's a Berkeley professor, Michelle. They're all liars.
There's no archaeology evidence for the Exodus?
Out of Egypt they did not come.
But the Bible says the Israelites lived in Egypt
Yeah, maybe we should
for
pause it for
430 years.
It's probably
Bible
good
does
idea.
say-
a second.
We just want to watch.
Oh no, it's captivating, honestly. You know, Lester Graby put out a book, I think in 2023, where he's looking at it's a second volume in a sort of a 2-part work, I think is how it was billed. But he's looking at early, where did the Israelites come from, right? It's sort of the same old question, the $64,000 question that scholars have been wrestling with. And I think it's important to note, as he does, and so many scholars I think hold this position, obviously not all of them, that while it is absolutely agreed upon, right, among historical critical scholars and archaeologists, that this picture of 2.5 to 3 million individuals leaving out of New Kingdom Egypt and leaving Egypt to go to Egypt, ostensibly, right, Egyptian controlled land, does not reflect, reality on the ground, and that the Israelites are Canaanites that are moving up into the highlands during Iron One or the end of the Late Bronze Age. While that's true, that doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't have individuals, pastoral nomads, even like Canaanite slaves from Egypt that made their way up into the highlands, ethnic group that was building there in Iron One, and bringing these stories or this story with them, right? How are we gonna verify that? That's a tough one to verify, right? But the idea that a handful of Canaanite slaves with the collapse of Egypt and its hold on Canaan, they escape out and credit their God with a miraculous deliverance from slavery. That's perfectly within the realm of possibility. So when he says out of Egypt they did not come, obviously we want to put that in context. We can't. I don't think anybody would argue that we can't know. I don't think anybody would argue that we can know. There you go. That no one of the proto-Israelites or Iron One, whatever, Israel, did not come. I have no idea what my negations did there, but hopefully you guys understood what I was saying. It's possible. That's the right way to say
but
it.
What it all boils down to all the time, Kipp, Josh, you literally in your story, which we launched remarkably has 60,000 views in 2 days, for your deconversion story, mentioned that possible. And while it is, and I'm not ruling it out, it could even be likely in some case that a small group or individuals or a couple people escaped, whatever. It's also plausible there are other explanations, and I love to adventure into those. Just to highlight and plug me and Paul here, is that we absolutely totally watch what critical scholars are doing with that. Then we also explore it from a literary level. There's kind of a romantic idea about Egypt, and there are various stories where people are in this exotic land of Egypt, and it's not just the Bible story. And then they like find a way to escape this evil pharaoh, or the pharaoh's trying to take the wife. There's a Greek story. I'm just saying there's probably various types of stories where Egypt plays a central exotic role in that theme. And I don't know what actually is history, what we could say with any high confidence is all I'm saying. There's plausible explanations in different ways of viewing it, in my opinion. But I entertain the idea that there's a kernel cultural memory or something like that. It's just I do both.
And I think it's important to point out this is what Professor Hendel says, right? He says there's no evidence of any kind for any sort of exodus. Right. He says there's no evidence for a widespread exodus as presented in the book of Exodus. And I think I mean I've mentioned this a number of times in a number of different places. We even have some texts within the Bible itself that present some softly different alternative kinds of views of this migration from the south, whatever it was, right? One of my favorites is in Hosea 12, where there's a mixing. Hosea looks to me like he's mixing alternative traditions about national origins, maybe those belonging to the south and those belonging to the north. And in the Exodus traditions that he has, there's mention of an anonymous prophet who leads the people. He's never named. He's just, this prophet who led you out of Egypt. Basically, what Hosea says. So, like scholars, when they say there's no evidence for the Exodus, what they're talking about is the very dramatic, detailed story as it's presented in the book of Exodus. But
can I give an example that complements this?
Yeah.
Is when you research classics and you're looking at people who are looking at Homer's Odyssey to look at Trojan War or the Iliad, they say there was probably a Troy. There was a real city named Troy and such. But that war, as described in the Odyssey, is potentially being kind of relifted and rewritten into Homer from an earlier Hittite narrative. And then when you ask the scholars who look at that, they say actually there was no such narrative story of that war. That war, there was no Trojan horse. That's all fiction, but there was a place called Troy. And what are we going to become apologists and try to make that Trojan horse? It better have happened. Or are we going to go, all right, there's total liberty in the narrative. The point of it isn't what actually literally is being written here, but maybe there's just an idea of freedom, God saving and redeeming his people as he promised, constant promises. You see where I'm going with it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, was there a Gilgamesh? Probably, right? And we seem to have some evidence, some pretty good evidence that there was a Gilgamesh in the third millennium. Does that mean that because there was a king of Uruk named Gilgamesh that he went out with Enkidu and killed Huwaba in the cedar forest and out?
That happened.
Yeah, I mean, so, was there a Naram Sin? Was there a Sargon of Akkad? Yeah, of course, right? Does that mean that Naram Sin actually sent out troops to go prick demon, soldiers that were coming to see if they bled? So, no, of course not, right? So I think, understanding that these things can be distinct I think this is important, and then I'll shut up. I think it's important to be careful in these moments, or precise in these moments, at least in particular context, for atheists and skeptics, to be able to say, in the same way that we say, let's be careful about what these passages about slavery are saying. I think in the same way, we need to be able to say, let's be careful about when we talk about evidence for the Exodus or not, let's not go too far and say impossible that anybody could have left Egypt, right? Because that's not the case.
No.
And we have evidence of people leaving and going into.
Just like we
Egypt.
have evidence that there were wars in the place called Troy. But that war, as described in the narrative, never happened according to the critical scholars who investigate that. And they would have probably, if they were studied in the Bible, had approached the Bible the same way in the sense of being critical and analyzing it this way as anyone else. It's just when people need these things is where I see things happen. So what do we want to continue playing it there, or did you guys have enough with Exodus?
Could I just say one thing quickly?
Yeah, please.
I think the grand scale of the Exodus story makes us forget that there's other traditions in the Bible that almost blatantly contradict it. And I'll just give one quick example that most people don't know about. In 1 Chronicles 7, you've got this story where Ephraim is not, the son of Joseph born in Egypt. He's a native settler of the land called Ephraim, and he has sons who go down to Gath and try to steal some cattle and get killed for it. And then he has a child named Beriah who's like named to remind them of their loss. And then his children go on to found these other Ephraimite cities. And then Joshua becomes one of his descendants. And you cannot take this story literally and also take the Exodus story literally. The Bible's got these traditions that compete with each other, and we tend to pick the ones that are more memorable and just focus on the historicity of those, and forget all these little side stories that are in the Bible.
So just to make sure our audience caught that issue, it is the fact that Ephraim, a descendant of Ephraim, is Joshua from the book of Joshua.
Yeah, and not only that, but this whole image that the chronicler presents in chapter 7 implies that there never was an Exodus. Ephraim and the other tribes are just native to their lands from the beginning. There's no place for an Exodus here.
Got it. Interesting. What's the function of the Exodus? Okay, guys, where are we going next? We're having a blast. I hope nobody's yawning at us yet. Where do you guys want to go?
Oh.
Did you want to Israelites are Canaanites?
Yeah, sure.
Kipp's like the under director here, where I was just sort of looking at him when Derek asked, "What do you want to do, Kipp?"
I'm just here to have fun. Paul, feel free. Thanks for interrupting because that was important. All right, here we go.
That's what's next, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to do now.
Sure. There we go.
The Canaanites, according to evangelical scholars, are so awful they deserve to lose their homes.
Please locate your nearest exit now.
God simply wants to steal the Canaanites' land.
Thank God.
Satan gets it.
But God's plot to steal the Canaanites' land is about to take an unexpected turn. Think back to the ites of Israel. If Moses and the Israelites never came from Egypt...
If not out of Egypt, where are the Israelites really from?
Where did they come from? For reals.
So when the archaeologists look at the material culture of early Israelite villages, they're continuous with the material culture of Canaanite culture. It's the same culture.
What?
Aren't Canaanites the bad guys?
Hebrew is a Canaanite language, and the early writings from the Bible show a clear continuity with older Canaanite literature, with Canaanite poetic forms, literary forms, people's names, people's language. This is all native Canaanite stuff.
Early Israelite settlements left archaeologists with native Canaanite stuff.
One of the names of God in the Bible is El. And El, we know, was also the name of the chief god of the Canaanite pantheon.
Evidence that Israelites worshipped the Canaanite god El is written into the name Israel itself.
It is?
Including the name Israel itself, which originally meant something like El rules.
El rules?
Who rules?
The Canaanite high god, El. El rules. Now watch this.
So the combination of archaeological evidence and textual and linguistic evidence makes it seem pretty obvious that the early Israelites were Canaanites.
Whoa.
Gosh.
Can it be?
The Israelites are another group of ites from Canaan.
You little fibber, you.
Egypt my ass.
Israelites are Canaanites?
The archaeological conclusion is that these are the same people.
Israelites cannot be Canaanites.
That would make a dirty diaper of the entire Bible story.
Hello? Anyone with a brain available? Like, duh, Israelites can't be from the promised land. Because later in my book, they still gotta enter the promised land.
This guy, all right? I already entered, okay?
Why lie about escaping Egypt?
Inventing fantastic origin stories is what everybody did. Every schmuck has an origin story. That's what I'm trying to say. We all got them, okay?
Israel is right. John Collins explains it.
The peoples of the ancient Near East engaged in what might be called competitive historiography to show how their national heroes outshone the heroes of other peoples or were the true and most ancient founders of culture.
You're saying all this Bible history is just made up to impress the neighbors?
Is that really all it is?
There's no need to minimize the power of story.
The original function of the story was to initiate people into an identity of being Israelite.
The Bible calls the first Israelites a mixed multitude.
From a mixed multitude of Canaanites into a unified, connected group of Israelites who were in the process of crystallizing into the people of Israel. In other words, the story, in a way, makes the people into the people.
The story makes the people into the people?
The story makes the people into the people.
And I think we should pause
No Egypt.
And no
for a second, because like there are many levels at work here. So if you think about the Akkadian, the very famous story that we're all aware of, the Enuma Elish, right? This story about the god Marduk and his ascendancy over the other gods. We have an Assyrian version of this myth, and it's fragmentary. But people can read Lambert's work on this in his 2013 Eisenbahn's publication in Mesopotamian Civilizations series. But like, essentially, you have this Babylonian myth from southern Mesopotamia. Very, very important, right? It's recited at every New Year's festival, at every Akitu festival. And it's such a foundational story, particularly during the first millennium. And there's a time where the Neo-Assyrians are in control during this first half of the first millennium BCE. And the Neo-Assyrian king goes down and sort of sacks parts of Babylonia that are under his control, sort of as punishment. And a short time later, we see this Assyrian version of this very, very important story called the Enuma Elish. And it's a story that everybody knows. Everybody knows where it came from. It's been around for quite some time, right? Half a millennium. And yet, this Assyrian version, which seems to sort of just come up, essentially just replaces the name of the god Marduk, the protagonist of the story, with the name of the, and Marduk was the Babylonian god, the chief Babylonian god, or the chief Babylonian god, and replaces it with the chief Assyrian god Ashur. Right, so everywhere in the story that you would ostensibly that you would see Marduk, they just replace it with Ashur. So the storyline essentially stays the same. Now, were these people like ignorant of the fact that this? Did they all just like forget? Oh, this is a Babylonian story. They forgot that part. No, of course not. Right? It's very intelligent people. But there's something more to your deity being assigned the role of conqueror, of the most powerful, of the one that's put in charge, whatever. Simply assigning that has power, right? There's a reason that they did this, and it wasn't because they, were like trying to suppress something else. In the same way, when you see these like formation stories, right, the texts are doing something. There's more to it than just we want to recount specifically the history, right? Because they didn't have that category necessarily like we have today. Instead, the texts have additional layers of power, right? That maybe we wouldn't recognize today. And I think that's important to bear in mind when you come through these and you read these texts and you engage in these topics, because texts do things. And I think that's what John Collins is getting at, as Ron Hendel's getting at, and certainly that's what the video is getting at. Texts do things.
And maybe I mean, in real world terms, like this, I think this is what, and maybe this helps piggyback a little bit on what Josh said, but in real world terms, like what's happening on the ground is often going to look very different from the ways in which people represent these ideas, especially with regards to issues pertaining to origins, ethnicity, connectedness, why we're more closely related to this group of people than we are to this other group of people. One of the things that the genealogies, the many different and often conflicting genealogies spread throughout the Hebrew Bible. One of the critical functions of these types of texts is to identify ourselves relative to everyone else, and they're structured in such a way which shows their closest relations, those people who are around them, and then there's like another layer of people who are a step removed from them. This is all communicated through the genealogies. Now so that's one thing, right? Some of this is, well, it's an idealized perspective, but it doesn't often work on the ground, right? Like one of the things that a question to consider when approaching the way the texts interact with the material culture or with our social or cultural history of Israel is just to ask, well, if you've got how does one become a member of an ancient Israelite tribe? Well, I think the natural response is, well, you're born into it. Is everybody born into it? Or do these groupings just kind of swallow people up in their orbit as they grow? And these people who might not even be closely related come to form this idea of being all part of a family, right? And it people adopt a figurehead or a patriarch, whether they have this direct relation to him or not. At some point in time, it just becomes impossible to trace that kind of an origin beyond like 3, 4, 5 generations. I mean, think of how difficult it is for us today now in the modern world with records, and try to imagine how much more difficult that would be in antiquity, where most of these people can't even write or read, right? And then there's another level of this too. So we know that in 722 BCE, the Assyrians came into the kingdom of Samaria, or the kingdom of Israel, and they wiped it out. They destroyed the city. They took a bunch of the people back to Nineveh with them, but not everyone. As far as the Bible is concerned, it's gone. Like, and the text itself doesn't make a distinction between the people who lived there and the nation of Israel. It's just gone. It is no more. You know, this is where, you know, these myths and ideas about the so-called lost 10 tribes of Israel come from. Where did they go? Did they all go to Assyria? Well, no. The vast majority of the people stayed in the region. Now, a huge number of these people, we can see when we're tracking the demographic developments in the archaeological layers of Jerusalem, we see that lots of these people came south to Jerusalem. Now, so there's this migration south. From the text perspective, the northern kingdom is gone, but all these people effectively kind of become subsumed into the vacuum, right? The vacuum which is filled in large part by the southern kingdom, by Judah. So, you know, this is very much how these texts work, and in particular with regards to this question of, you know, who the Israelites were and where they came from. It worked like this. They're people who forged an identity on the basis of, you know, common relationships with one another through families, common ideas with regards to, you know, the tribal god Yahweh, common enemies in some cases, but they galvanized themselves around these ideas, and, you know, that's where the stories end up coming from.
Paul?
Yeah, I was just going to say that for me studying this stuff, you know, it's easy for apologists to say, well, just because there's no, you know, archaeological evidence for the Exodus and for Jews in Israel doesn't mean it didn't happen. We're just missing it. You know, there's obviously huge gaps in the record, but what I find the most compelling is the what Ronald Hendel was saying here, and that the material culture of Israel is in complete continuity. The language is in continuity. The religion is in continuity with the Bronze Age Canaanites. There's no gap. There's no place where this whole nation could have been immersed in Egyptian culture and language for 400 years and then just came back like nothing had ever happened. So for me, that's sort of the clincher that Israel was always a Canaanite country, even if they had this myth of origins in Egypt, even if maybe some of their people did come from Egypt as small groups of slaves or priests or whatever. And then just to comment on what Kipp said about genealogies, you know, they're doing a lot of work through the genealogies to distinguish themselves from the other Canaanites by saying, well, the Canaanites are part of the Ham's lineage with the Egyptians, and we're part of this other lineage. And it's funny that the genealogies have to do what reality, what the religion and the language cannot accomplish on its own.
And look, just very quickly, like an important point that I think for many people just takes a little bit of time for it to sink in, and hearing it and sort of engaging with it. Just because Genesis comes first in the canon doesn't mean that it comes earliest, right? And I think that's something that's difficult for people to sometimes wrap their heads around, particularly if they're raised like I was in like a more fundamentalist evangelical community. You know, these texts, like there isn't an Exodus tradition. Like Stephen Russell wrote this volume where he's arguing for 3 different Exodus traditions. And they may go back early. I mean, I think he very generously, conservatively, says, you know, one of them might go back to like the 11th century. But of course, it would have been an oral form. And but he argues for a northern tradition, which has its own nuances, a southern tradition, and a Transjordanian tradition, and they're all different, right? And these texts, like, no, whether you take a neo-documentarian view of the formation of the Pentateuch, or if you take like a tradition historical view, in either case, these are at a minimum hundreds of years, half a millennium later than the events are purported to have taken place.
Right.
And that's just for their like initial stages under one particular view. These texts are undergoing redaction, right? At a minimum, they're being compiled. And this is happening much, much later, right? And then you have P material, and then you have holiness material. Like, these are things that are in many ways, let's say kindly, coloring the text, right? And so anyway, the point that I'm trying to make is that we're not dealing with a text contemporaneous with its purported events.
Right.
But you're dealing with a tradition that is hundreds, it's being put together at the earliest hundreds of years later into writing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important point to recognize in this discussion.
Gentlemen, let's bump into child sacrifice as in ancient Israel. I think, isn't that our next one, if I'm not mistaken?
I think so.
Because we did.
Kipp, I see you doing this.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's go to child sacrifice, and here we go.
Plenty.
Child sacrifice.
Only false gods do that.
That's totally gross.
My God is definitely not cool with child sacrifice.
They get to the point where they're actually sacrificing their children.
And if Israelites or Canaanites.
Did Israelite dads kill their kids too?
It is now widely recognized that human sacrifice was practiced in ancient Israel much later than scholars of an earlier generation had assumed.
Oh boy.
Exodus 22 appears to require the sacrifice of the firstborn. The Judean kings, Ahaz and Manasseh, are accused of child sacrifice. The practice cannot be dismissed as due to foreign influence, but had venerable precedence in the cult of Yahweh.
Baloney. My God is not cool with killing innocent children for divine favors in battle.
That may be, but the God of the Bible is.
Victory in battle is related in an integral way to your offering these things to the deity.
In the 11th chapter of the book of Judges, Jephthah, the leader of the Israelites, who are at war with the Ammonites.
Maybe can we pause it there for a second? Because
hopefully we can pick it back up because there's still more to come, I'm sure, on this one.
There is, but I think there's there's a couple of different things going on here that I feel are important to point out. First of all, it's difficult to evaluate what's going on in ancient Israel with regards to child sacrifice in particular, because the text as we have it at the time that it was put together is so uniformly opposed to this idea. However, careful readers of the text, and this is maybe something that doesn't come out as clearly in the video, but that the scholars featured would tell you, careful scholars reading these texts are going to also see a lot of places in the literature where the common idiom is "thou dost protest too much." You have a number of these texts, right? I'm thinking in particular of Jeremiah 7. I think it's verses 28 through 30, where Yahweh is talking about how upset he is with the people because they've burned their sons in the valley of Tophet in these mock sacrifices, or as many English translations will translate this as for Molech, thinking this is a deity, but Probably not, because we have this same term applied to these same sorts of rituals in other ancient Near Eastern texts. So anyways, Jeremiah is going, or Yahweh through Jeremiah is going, you caused your sons to pass through the fire, you offered them up for burnt offerings to in these mulk rituals. And then he goes, this is something I never wanted. This is something I never commanded. What are you doing? Of course I don't want this. So, it's these sorts of texts, or in I think it's in Leviticus.
They're just going to wiggle out of this, by the way, by saying, well, that was a different cult of Yahweh, and our cult of Yahweh is accurate. And you know what I mean? There's always a wiggle.
So sure. And it might, on some level, there might be something to that,
right.
Where we recognize that, there was not this monolith of Yahweh worship in ancient Israel, right? In fact, as is typical, you've got Yahweh of Samaria, Yahweh of Shomron. You've got Yahweh of I think it's Tema. You've got these inscriptions from the region, from the area. It's very similar to what you read about in the biblical text with regards to Baal. There's Baal of Peor. There's Baal of what are some? I think there is a Baal of Samaria as well. But so there's these, there's these localized systems, these localized communities of worship around these same deities with the same name. And I think it's natural to think that they're not going to look exactly like one another in every single place. And maybe this is part of why Josiah's reforms in 2 Kings chapter 23 are so significant for his stability and his maintenance of power. It's part of an effort to consolidate all of these different worship rituals, worship practices into this one thing.
But the righteous Messiah, didn't he do human sacrifice as part of that cleansing and purity to the right Yahweh God? I mean,
that's another issue entirely. And if anyone's interested, I made a video all about this fairly recently. You can go check that out on my channel. It doesn't have a clickbaity title at all on it. So that's one of these things is just how difficult it is to find some of the ways in which we suspect that this is something that was practiced. And then within the video, they're also conflating a couple of different things. Child sacrifice can take various forms in something like the Molk ritual. That's a different thing entirely from something like we read in Exodus chapter 22, which is this firstborn offering. You're to offer the firstborn of your flocks and your animals, as well as your firstborn son, before they turn 8 days old, right? So that's a different thing, and that's a different thing entirely from a form of human sacrifice that's taking place in battle traditions and in how in the Israel's war doctrine. What Susan Neidich is getting at there is that this type of ritualized warfare that we see as and identify as cherem warfare. This is from this is the Hebrew word which is often translated as the devoted thing or the ban. So these are offerings that have been set aside for Yahweh. He demands the entire destruction of a city. Everything that lives, everything that breathes, is to be killed as an offering to him. One of the ways in which this works in an ancient Near Eastern economy of sacrifice is, within an early mindset, things were transmitted from the human realm, the natural realm, into the divine realm by way of their destruction. So it makes perfect sense that if you're going to give something to Yahweh, you light it on fire, right? Or you just kill it and then light it on fire. So I just want to point out there's a variety of different things going on here. It's hard, it's difficult, and it's incorrect usually to try and consolidate all of these things under one label or one umbrella. There's various ways in which human beings were killed or slaughtered out of devotion to Yahweh, as with other ancient Near Eastern gods, other Canaanite deities.
Paul, I know you're. Let's give people a sneak peek, and seems that Satan has distracted Josh, or maybe it's Jesus. I'm not sure. Paul
or Kent Hovind.
For those who don't know, I figure why not? Paul's got an amazing YouTube channel that he's been working on stuff, and I love his editing, and he's like me in terms of diving in. But because I'm so busy, I've got Paul tackling some of the documentaries I'm doing, and one we're working on right now. Paul, can you tease us with it?
Yeah, we're doing everyone's favorite topic, child sacrifice. So we'll be covering it in much more depth, of course, than what we just saw.
Yeah, we're going to have fun with that one. So let's hope it complements some of the things you're saying. But there's no reason, I guess better way to put it is look at Abraham with Isaac. Even if he did not sacrifice him in the narrative we have in the Bible, and I haven't even found any, I haven't seen any textual evidence that there's an example that Abraham himself did sacrifice him, other than maybe rabbis thought maybe later on at some point. But there is a hint in Eusebius's work based on Philo-Biblos, who's quoting a Phoenician Sanchoniathon, a priest of Canaan, the Phoenician area, talking about the god El sacrificing his son Yedud, something. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but
that's right.
Then he sacrifices his only begotten son, Eusebius says, and then turns around and circumcises himself. So there's definitely something going on with human sacrifice in antiquity. And is there anything else we need to do, or do we just play some more?
I think we can go, unless you got something else to say, Josh.
No, I'm good. Sorry, I had something.
A little bit more of it. See what it says.
Wanting to secure victory for the Israelites, Jephthah makes a promise to God.
If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering.
The leader of the Israelites promises God he will set fire to whoever greets him first when he returns home from battle.
He will devote to the Lord first thing he sees. But of course, it turns out to be his daughter, his only child. And
I'm back, and I won. Who's behind door number 1?
Welcome home, Daddy.
Oh no, he didn't.
But he did.
And he did to her as he had vowed.
In a war context, when what's offered is killing human beings, we have to assume that they assume that God appreciated human sacrifice, right?
Right.
Okay,
See,
that's not good.
If I
But
could just
everything
pause
you're
it here
thinking
once
is from the
more, because I really think this is the critical point, right? Is that people thought this is what Yahweh wanted. Now, they didn't come to this conclusion, just on their own. And I think it's a very difficult argument to make that this is just something they decided to do counter to all this literature that they have that says don't sacrifice your children to Yahweh, or just don't sacrifice your children at all. No, they thought this because this was part of the religious tradition. If not everywhere, then certainly in various places at various times. We don't know how widely this is a practice that was observed, or how often, but there's plenty of there's plenty of evidence within the texts themselves, which indicates that people certainly seem to think on a regular basis this is a good idea.
Now, I know that your point, I've even heard apologists try to say Yahweh didn't want him to do it. And so a lot of times they'll try to wiggle out and say he never sacrificed him, but the text does not say that. It's implied that she needs to mourn her virginity, if anything.
Oh, you're talking about the Jephthah story.
Well, yeah, that's the one that was on the documentary just now. But I think it's important to note that if you would think that if the author wanted you to know that Yahweh was condemning, or El was condemning this particular Jephthah's proposition of sacrificing the first thing that comes to the door, first of all, the God who controls the universe, depending on how powerful you think he is, if you're anachronistically applying these theological ideas to him, why did he even allow the daughter to come in the first place? But let's just forget all that and just assume, well, she just randomly somehow ends up through the door. He could have said, listen, I don't need sacrifice. I don't even need this. I know you vowed, but I'm a righteous God and I show you mercy. You don't even need to do that. The victory was mine to begin with.
Like
he could have come up with anything.
He stopped another sacrifice like that. I can't remember where exactly, but
is it a guy named Abraham Lincoln or something? I think
something roughly,
something like that. Yeah. I think it was anyway. I really appreciate those comments on the human sacrifice side. Do we want to continue? Oh, by the way, one comment on this before we do, wherever you guys want to go. I love how he sprinkles in the modern Christian, like he contextualizes how a modern Christian would literally think about some of these things, most of them in an everyday pew at church, if they heard this and actually understood what's being implied and saw it, how they're like, that's not good. Yeah. Good eye. I'm glad that you're walking with the kids in the video going, my little light shine and all that. You're singing these songs and then you're going, this isn't good. That's so clever how he created the documentary doing that. Where do you want to go next?
I don't know. What do you have next?
Before we got to the New Testament, we could do Bart Ehrman. They'll go into Bart Ehrman.
Let's talk about Bart Ehrman.
Okay, perfect. There's enough of Bart Ehrman going around for all of us. All right, I'm scrolling ahead to what timestamp was that, Paul?
49:15, I think.
Okay, got it. Here we go. 49:15.
He is the most famous of all the biblical scholars. I give you UNC Chapel Hill's
Bart fracking Ehrman.
Dr. Ehrman's middle initial is, in fact, a D. Bart Denton Ehrman. And Christians on YouTube, they're in a total tizzy about his books.
You got people like our good friend here.
Isn't it amazing that he's in this thing?
I love that he pulled up the Christian
Bart.
I mean,
he's been on Comedy Central. He's published over 20 books.
The best-selling author with Oxford University Press.
See what Bart Ehrman says in his quoting Jesus. See what Bart Ehrman says in Jesus Interrupted.
The Orthodox Corruption of Scripture. How about that one?
That book right there, it's called Misquoting Jesus. Bart Ehrman, in high school, he trusted Jesus Christ as his personal savior.
And how's it working today?
He's like the premier attacker of the Bible in the world right now.
Our primary English-speaking critic.
What happened to Bart? Demon trickery.
I'm going to take care of him with a clothesline.
That guy is such an idiot.
Really?
I don't normally say that
Critical
about people. I'm
scholarship that I've
sorry.
promoted in my books.
What?
Those are things that
That was a great
seminarians
message.
learn when they're training for ministry if they go to a mainline Protestant seminary.
They're teaching BART stuff to everyone? Anyone who has gone at least through, I would say, a master's level would be well aware of every argument that Bart Ehrman has ever presented. It's standard stuff.
This is standard stuff that people are taught in all the mainline Christian theological seminaries across the country and in Europe. And yet most pastors who've gone through that training don't tell their congregations what it is that they've learned.
Seminary secrets.
Yep. Health insurance is super important.
If Pastor Mark wants to tell the truth and he loses his health coverage, we could do a bake sale to pay the bill.
Yeah, if his kid breaks a bone, we'll do a bake sale.
Well, that is beautiful.
And a whole lot of pie.
Yummy. Get hurt.
Here's seminary standard stuff about the book of Daniel. Standard stuff about
Do you want to comment before we get, because I know you want to talk about Daniel, but any comments before just
about Bart the Boogeyman?
Bart the
My wife is his
Boogeyman
podcast host. I don't know if anybody knows that.
You know,
yeah, please mention this too. That's
Megan
interesting.
Lewis, you know, gotta make sure I plug that. You know, she's his podcast host, you know, just the two of them up on the screen.
Once a week?
Once a week. Yeah. Misquoting Jesus podcast. Check it out.
I'll tell you this. I've had several conversations with him. Paul, I know you've got something to definitely jump in on this, I'm sure. Bart told me that what he's saying, he has seen other scholars say the same exact things. This is why I can't help but psychoanalyze to some degree about the tribalistic, who it is that's saying it and things like that. Bruce Metzger, he's seen him lecture, talk about the exact same things he says. When it comes out of his mouth, he notices all of the Christian apologists get into the boogeyman mode. But when Metzger or any Christian academic says it, notice they're all like, "Oh, amen, brother. Amen, brother. Yeah. That we knew that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like they do not treat, it's not the same. And it's about who's saying it, because simply Bart doesn't believe, and he's very vocal about not believing. That bothers them. And I think that's probably something going on in terms of some tribalism or something. But he's expressed that to me, that he's saying nothing different than Metzger or any other Christian academic.
I think you go ahead, Paul.
Okay, I mean, I just thought it was funny that they dedicate a whole section of this video, you know, to Bart Ehrman, and I don't follow any apologists these days, so I'm just impressed by the mind share that Bart Ehrman apparently has in their work and their lives. Is it just because his books have sold better than anyone else's? You know, I mean, I love Bart Ehrman, but he's not saying, like you say, he's not saying anything else that 1,000 other scholars aren't saying. I think I got my negatives right. Yeah, is it just maybe Josh, you have some idea of how many books he sold? Because I don't. I assume it's in the millions by now.
Yeah,
I'm quite sure.
Yeah,
guaranteed.
I mean,
you know, when they mentioned that, I don't know if I caught that the first time or the first couple times through this documentary, but William Lane Craig there actually said that Bart Ehrman is the #1 selling author for Oxford University Press. Like, and I don't know how true that is, and I don't know, like, if that's, you know, if he's, I'm sure he's the #1 selling author of like biblical studies books published by Oxford, because they publish all sorts of things.
Doesn't he only publish through Harper?
I thought his most recent one was through Oxford, wasn't it? The textbook is, yeah.
Okay.
Is that's the textbook, right, John? Oh no, that's okay.
But Misquoting Jesus and Jesus Interrupted and all the famous ones, those are all HarperCollins, I think.
Okay. Yeah, and probably I think the reach is a little wider than OUP. But in any event, I'm certain that this is the product, right? It is because which one was that?
Oxford. That's misquoting, right?
Oh, that's
Forgery.
forgery and counter-forgery, right?
They all sold. Let me just put it this way: I know for a fact that he's on like New York Times top. He's up there, upper echelon.
He's catching up to the Atheist Handbook Volume 2. Yeah, he's getting there. A couple more years. He'll be neck and neck, you know.
I don't think he'll catch you though, but you know, it's one of those things. I'm going to continue into Daniel.
If only he published with Digital Hammurabi Press.
Only if he would. Now we need to get to this awesome prophetic book, which absolutely proves the validity of the Bible. And, you know, you might see us all convert on screen here after listening to what the book of Daniel has to present.
Authorship and predicting the future.
Prophecy!
Daniel was stupendous.
A total winner.
Daniel made many predictions about the future that came true.
Proof the Bible is a godly book. Admit it, Satan.
Daniel did predict all those things that came true.
Yeah. I wonder how Daniel did it.
By pretending to be someone living in the distant past, an author could predict the future.
Huh? Pretending? Like doing impersonations?
Excellent, Betty. You are right on target.
The book of Daniel, allegedly written by the great wise man of the 6th century BCE,
BC me,
was actually written in the judgment of almost all critical scholars some 400 years later.
What the
Whoa,
fuck?
liar.
If the book of Daniel was written 400 years later, then that would mean Daniel did not author the book of Daniel. His name is on the book, Bart.
The reality is that the author wasn't living in the 6th century BCE. He was only claiming to live then. He was actually living in the 2nd century, 400 years later.
You have a span of time in between. And the book of Daniel can predict those events.
I love Collins.
Very accurately.
No wonder Daniel could predict the rise of the Persians and the Greeks. The author of these prophecies lived after they had taken place.
After?
This will happen, this will happen, this will happen, that will happen. He knew those things were going to happen because he was living after they happened. So he's not actually predicting the future. He's pretending to be somebody in the past predicting the future.
It's prophecy after the fact.
That seems kind of wrong.
Why pretend like that?
It's all a big setup.
Who's the mark?
The reader.
Your reader reads it and realizes you've been right all along. Everything you've predicted, in fact, has happened. So that then if you go on to predict what's going to happen very soon, it seems like that's also going to happen because everything else you said has happened.
If the predictions are known to have been accurate down to the present, then they are likely to be reliable for the future too.
All the after-the-fact prophecies build the reader's confidence in the very last prophecy.
What was the last prophecy?
That an enemy king, Antiochus Epiphanes, would die in Israel.
Did he?
Where did he die?
Was it in Israel?
Nope, not in Israel.
And then the real prediction wasn't actually fulfilled.
A failed prophecy in my book?
In fact, the concluding prophecy of the death of the king was not fulfilled.
That's not right-minded reading, Johnny.
Right-minded readers read rightly.
Just because the very last prophecy did not happen only means that it will eventually happen.
And will eventually be seen to have spoken truly.
Daniel will eventually be seen to have spoken truly. It could still happen.
I'm sorry, but it's so true. I mean, like,
yes.
I'm sorry. I'm just.
This is good. This is so good. This documentary is amazing.
I mean, I feel like it just strikes a chord with me at every scene. Right? This is it could still happen. Right? This is a double prediction. Right, type of prophecy. It's even the prophet didn't know exactly what he was prophesying. I mean, like the shit we come up with.
You are literally describing people. I'm sure you've engaged them with this. Why you're saying this? I have had people who've reached out to me who they say, I can't read for sure, they seem sincerely trying to resolve Daniel with like making it to where it doesn't fail. They go so far to say none of the authors, not even the New Testament authors who are trying to kind of use it as a fulfillment, the Jewish authors that are around this that were reading and quoting it, nobody understands it, and that it's still going to fulfill itself sometime in the future. But like nobody understood it.
I mean, this is not new, right? I mean, like in Antiquity, Second Esdras, right? Is it in chapter 12? I can't remember off the top of my head, 10 or 12. But like says, Daniel thought that the fourth kingdom was Greece, but God didn't give him the information that he needed, as I'm going to give it to you now, right? It's actually Rome.
But my God, like I think we've all lived this though, right? Like it's not just our interactions with people online. Like I grew up going to a Baptist church when I was a kid, and when I was in high school, my Sunday school class was taught by a guy who was like a dyed-in-the-wool dispensationalist, and he spent like the full year basically just laying out the book of Daniel and aligning all the prophecies and calculating the times of when these were going to take place. So I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, and back in the 1940s, the premier of Alberta, that's like that would be the equivalent to an American state, right? His name was Ernest Manning, and he was not only the premier of Alberta, he was also an evangelical preacher. And he had, prior to becoming the premier, he had a famous radio show on every week where he taught the Bible. And during the entire time that he was serving in office, he had a microphone on his desk and continued to do his Bible study radio show every week from the office of power there. Anyways, Ernest Manning apparently had commissioned several sets of these elaborate timelines to be painted on like these white linen, basically bed sheets, and then sewn together. They were huge. These a timeline illustrating, from the beginning of creation all the way through to, the last days, the apocalypse, and reading all this stuff through the book of Daniel, right? Because we know this hasn't happened yet, but he had 6 or 7 or 8 of these things commissioned, and somehow my Sunday school teacher got a hold of one of these sets of Premier Ernest Manning's bed sheets and would string them up. He'd hang them up around the Sunday school room and out the door and down the hall, and it was captivating. It was intoxicating kind of stuff, especially when you're in high school, right? But this is nothing. This is nothing new. It's nothing old. It's just it just keeps going, right?
It does. Any comments from you guys?
Well,
sorry.
I mean, the whole timeline of Daniel is a mess from the start, right? The very first verse. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And that dates off by 11 years, I think.
Yeah.
Or something. Like, it's even within the Bible, you cannot square those timelines. And this is the past, not the future that Daniel's trying to predict.
As Josh has said several times, and I mean, highlighting the scholarly works of John Collins, who's in this documentary, and others, that the further back, the less accurate, the closer to the 2nd century BCE, the more accurate, and to the T, it's accurate. And then after the time the author supposedly wrote these things, wrong completely, like doesn't get a single thing correct after that timeline, which helps authors pin down the timing in which this author most likely wrote. And yes, there's some complexity with Daniel, it's using various languages, which Josh has a book on right there with Aramaic, chapters 1 through 7.
Right.
Yeah, I'll plug it because I read it on the plane ride down to a thing that place I spoke. But it's a 2022 publication, Aramaic Daniel, by I think it's pronounced Sukkard, but I think he's at Leiden. But it's an excellent work. He's looking at the various layers that you see in the Aramaic chapters of the book, and making arguments for like their progression. So it's a dense read. Like, I don't want anybody to think it's not a dense read. But yeah, it's pretty excellent. Recommend.
Thank you on that.
I'll say one other thing about this. Like, one of the reasons, I mean, if it was just the book of Daniel, then I don't know. Maybe that's a better case for trying to special plead your way through this. But the thing is, we have all sorts of examples of this same type of literature. We have tons of it in the Dead Sea Scrolls where they're doing exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. And some of the texts that we have surviving in the Dead Sea Scrolls are texts written around the same period of time as Daniel and doing the same things. There's texts from other parts of the ancient Near East that are similar to this. I think I believe it's the dynastic prophecies from Babylon are doing the same thing. They're prophecies, about the end of the rule, the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, basically the transition of time from Nebuchadnezzar's death to the very unpopular Nabonidus, but set hundreds of years earlier, right? As if it's predicting what's going to happen. We've got so many examples of this type of literature from other places. So much so that, for someone who wants to glom on to Daniel as somehow historical and somehow, these special examples of fulfilled prophecy, then you kind of have to do the same thing for the dynastic prophecies, and then for things like the Book of Enoch and things like the Book of Jubilees and things like the Apocryphon of Jeremiah or the Aramaic Levi document, or I don't know, piles and piles of this other literature.
Hey, I don't mean to cut you off here. Who's this?
Oh my God!
I told you, Josh. I'll be out in just a minute. Hey, folks, Ken Hovind here. I've been down to the basement drinking coffee here for about the past 4.5 hours. I'm a little worked up, okay? But I'm here to tell you that, your thoughts on Satan's guide to the Bible are I think, misplaced. And of course, he's straight from the devil. Pretty funny there. Himself, just like that BART Ehrman. Okay. So, of course, we know that, Jesus probably believed in that evolution, and that you come from soup. Okay. But we know that the water rained down on the otters. Okay. I'm here to help.
Wow. So, Kent, you don't agree with the documentary?
Oh, well, I mean, you're probably one of those perverts, aren't you, Derek? Sitting there thinking about those 14-foot whale penises. Okay, that's probably where that question came from. What else you got for me here? Because obviously, something that has a Satan's name in it. Of course, that would be straight from the devil. Okay, I'm here to help.
Well, Kent, it seems like Josh had to leave because he's trying to protect his kids from you. Thanks for showing up. And
I don't have time to sit around here with you atheists, and you're on your way to hell. Repent, and believe the gospel. Okay, and come on down to Dinosaur Adventureland, $59.95. I'll give you a good discount. Okay, because we got some great places to stay. A couple alligators here and there, but
I hear the swimming's very good too.
Yeah, I mean, you Canadians, you probably don't even know how to swim. Yeah, pervert. right. Okay, I don't have time to sit around here and play with you guys. I'll make sure that Josh knows what you think about him and how you're bringing him down to hell. Okay, I'm here to help.
Ken. Appreciate.
Have a good night.
You as well. Oh, that guy Kent, man. That guy Kent. Do we need to continue with Daniel?
Guy. I think we're good. Unless Paul, do you have some more?
I just want to plug Kipp's recent videos on Daniel, especially the Dead Sea Scrolls stuff.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Those are really good.
Yeah. So, and I'll just say on that point, one of the things that the evangelical apologists will do with some frequency is appeal to the Dead Sea Scrolls in an effort to promote this idea of Daniel's antiquity and his legitimacy as like a forth-telling prophet. But I got to tell you, when I read the Dead Sea Scrolls, I see a much, much different picture. And it's one that rather illustrates very clearly the developmental picture of the book of Daniel that scholars have been positing for centuries now.
So scholarship's on the right track.
We seem to be.
I'm going to go with that. People who know the languages and are actually investigating the stuff the same way you would approach any material in antiquity. Let's go to failed end time prophecies roll call real quick here, and then hopefully we can roll it to Paul's missing tomb, but we'll stop here before we get to Paul's missing tomb because I know that's one that Paul wanted to get to.
Some truly good people got a little too wild with the apocalypticism.
Lot more than some. All the top players did. Yet most people think it's only kooks and nutters predicting the end of the world. Instead, failed apocalyptic prophecies have been offered up by the biggest stars of the Christian faith.
That's Billy Graham. He predicted the end?
Yeah, Billy said the end would come before 1952.
Humans gonna human.
Mr. Protestant Christianity himself had the end coming before 1600. Christopher Columbus said it would end in 1501.
Columbus? Seriously?
Francis of Assisi, lots of popes. St. Patrick of St. Patty's Day fame.
Game Clover.
3rd century Christian star Hippolytus of Rome. 2nd century's Tertullian.
Who?
And listening to you, Jesus. You got a little too wild with the apocalypticism, didn't you?
And you got a little blah, blah, blah with the blah, blah, blah.
Did you not preach a 1st century ending?
Did you not preach a 1st century ending?
Jesus was not a false prophet.
You calling Jesus a liar?
Pay no heed to Satan. Close your ears to his words. Slanderous, deceitful, deadly words. People will burn because of your lies, Satan.
I invent nothing. Christian seminaries teach it.
Sorry, Satan, but that's beyond plausible.
Which part?
Christian seminaries teaching Jesus, making failed prophecies?
Failed apocalyptic prophecies.
Some of them that stand here.
End of the world prophecies?
That failed to come to pass.
Christian seminaries teach that?
About Jesus?
That's a seminary secret?
The biggest one. Jesus told his followers the end would happen soon.
And soon didn't happen.
That's the seminary's biggest secret.
If Jesus said that it would be soon and it didn't happen, then he was wrong about that.
Jesus was wrong?
There's no scriptural proof for anything that you're saying.
It's not in the Bible.
Jesus' failed prophecies are in the Bible.
Where?
Hiding in plain sight.
What verse? Where?
I'm going to show you.
It's not in the Bible.
Hey, first things first. Let's look at the reason this whole gigantic Christian thing got rolling.
Shout out to me.
Because Jesus.
Jesus is the reason.
Which leads us to the most important event for all Christians.
The resurrection.
It's the single biggest event in the Bible. It's the reason for Christianity.
Okay. You're not muted, Kipp.
Oh, shoot.
Let me mute him. So, Paul, did you have a comment on that?
No,
So
not really
far.
on that. I just wanted to comment on the tomb, but that'll come up.
Okay. So you don't have anything to say about the failed apocalyptic expectations and stuff?
Well, I think it's interesting that they bring on Dale Allison to talk about this because up till now they've been relying on Bart Ehrman a lot, but Allison is quite a devout Presbyterian, I think.
Mhm.
Like he's not, some atheist trying to debunk the Bible. He's
right.
You know.
But that's a pretty honest statement, and he's
yeah.
over and over made this point.
I mean,
that
C.S. Lewis called that verse in Mark the most embarrassing verse in the Bible, I think, because he couldn't defend it either.
Right.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, he. I think that's one of the things he did say and admitted that. One of the things we did when we were trying to fix this as Christians in eschatology, becoming full preterist, the heretics that we were, trying to make the second coming of Jesus in 70 AD, which is its own topic itself, we would go and quote these people. And the Christians who admitted didn't happen. And that's why you see, I think, the rise of Christians trying to investigate, looking for possible, what are called conditional eschatology ideas. Well, if you do good, then I'll come. So like, really, it's ignoring the soon passages and like as if he had any evaluation of really how to track time of when things were supposed to occur. And so technically it could happen tomorrow. It could happen in 1,000 years. It could happen in thousands of years. These Christians have found a way to try and ignore those words in Greek melo, which are relevant to the soon or nearness of something happening. The Bible doesn't know how to speak so that we can actually understand what it means when it says things. And they'll just run to 2 Peter 3, where it talks about a day is 1,000 years. So technically we have no clue what we're reading or how to know anything, because words can mean anything now. And so, it seems like an excuse to get the failure off the hook.
No, that makes sense. I mean, in a in that sort of a context, it makes sense.
Right. Okay, I'm going to move on to the empty, or we'll let resurrection play to the empty tomb. I think it's all one little, probably like 2 minutes, and then we can get into that.
Resurrection. It's Jesus's resurrection. The Bible says Jesus of Nazareth was resurrected from the dead. Oh, no way, you say? The Bible says Jesus' tomb is empty. His body vanished.
God's not dead. No! He's alive. God's not dead. No! He's alive. God's not dead. No!
The earliest discussion we have of the resurrection is provided by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15.
God's not dead. No! He's alive. God's
His argument is striking, since he makes no mention of an empty tomb.
The oldest mention of Jesus' resurrection comes from Christianity's number 2 man, the guy with the most books in the New Testament. Paul never mentions, not once, the empty tomb.
in the church. I feel him on the street.
Hold on, back up. Empty what? Tomb, dude. Tomb. And then there was an empty tomb. Empty tomb. Okay, yeah, so?
I was in here, totally dead. And then...
Poof! The tomb was empty. I'm sorry, who was in the tomb? Jesus.
I will eternally be amazed that you, Paul, you never mention the central core story about the resurrection.
It is odd Paul never wrote about the empty tomb.
It's super important to know.
Maybe he just forgot about it.
The empty tomb's in the Bible. Doesn't matter what part.
You guys are so focused on a single empty tomb, you're going to miss out on the main event.
I thought Jesus' resurrection was the main event.
So you got something bigger than the empty tomb, Paul?
I do. Very soon, possibly tonight, all the tombs will be emptied. All the tombs. More than one tomb.
Resurrection in a first century Jewish context is not about some guy rising from the dead in the middle of history. It's about a corporate event.
Corporate? It's kind of a group thing.
As a Jew, Paul was deeply committed to the resurrection of the dead, an ancient belief.
So stinky. What's the point of digging up dead people?
Because everyone, dead or alive, faces judgment for their earthly lives. When the end comes,
The final judgment.
The end of the world.
Before becoming a Christian, Paul was an apocalyptic Jew.
What would an apocalyptic Jew conclude if he or she came to believe that God had now raised someone?
For Paul, the resurrection of Jesus is not an isolated event. Since one person has already been raised, the rest cannot be far behind. The end is at hand.
Since the resurrection of the dead was to
Is that
come
is
at
that
the
all you
end of
wanted to
the
cover,
age,
Paul?
and since somebody
Yeah, that's enough.
Okay.
So I'm not sure how well this video gets across the significance of Paul not mentioning the empty tomb, and maybe I've missed the point, but what I gather from reading on this subject is that there's this gulf between the time of Paul and his theology and the time when the narratives of Jesus get set down in the Gospels. And it seems very possible, and I've been reading a lot of Burton Mack on this, who died a few years ago. His books are great, but also very difficult to understand. But he says that the empty tomb was Mark's way of explaining how Jesus was vindicated by his death and resurrection. So before Mark's story, the resurrection was not about Jesus popping out of the tomb and appearing to disciples and stuff. The resurrection was more Jesus ascending to heaven after his death and taking his position of power at God's right hand. And by Mark's time, I guess that spiritualization of the resurrection wasn't enough, and a more physical story was needed to accomplish the Christian mission and the way that they wanted to represent the apocalyptic views of Jesus. I don't know if Kipp agrees with that or not.
No, that's interesting, and I haven't thought.
You're loud. I don't know if you're too
sorry,
close to the mic or something. Not sure. Just trying to make sure.
Has it been like that the whole time?
No, since you came back from when you turned your camera off for a second and then you came back.
Okay,
that's better. Yeah, that's better. That's better.
Yeah. All right. So, like, I don't spend nearly enough time. I haven't looking into a lot of this stuff with Paul. It's not really in my wheelhouse. But I mean, one of the things that I think is clear is, and this often gets, I think, misconstrued or lost, is that when you look at the text in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where Paul describes the resurrection, it's really quite explicit what his point is, right? Like, there tends to be this fixation on the creed in the first part of 15 about, all the appearances to the people.
Mm-hmm.
And then it ends with that one, right, that he appeared to 500, and that's usually used as like an apologetic talking point about, oh wow, look at all these witnesses that you can just go and check it out with, right? Like just track them down and talk to them. That's why Paul included this, right? This is why the 500 are important in this creed. What does Paul say right after that? He says, no, well, he says that most of them are alive, but some have already died. And then in the following chapter, he starts talking about how nervous and anxious the Corinthians are because of the fact that there's people in their congregation who started to die, and nothing's happening. Like, what's going on? Aren't we all? Isn't this supposed to be a big deal? Like, we're supposed to experience this this final moment, this final resurrection, and then Paul has to go through and explain, right, in pretty exacting detail exactly what this means. What is the resurrection? What is the replacement of the body of flesh with the body of spirit? I just it it's such a critical point in his theology, and yet so often it's something that people just do not see, even when it's literally like right there. It's like right in front of your face.
I'll just add to what you said there, Paul, that various scholars have like various observations based on this, and it seems to be a well-established observation amongst critical scholars that there seems to be a growing theme, like you talked about. If Mark, he hints at post appearances, he hints at like I'll meet you in Galilee, but he never. There's no documentation of Mark saying here they are, they're seeing him in Galilee. So we have to assume that there would have been some type of appearances, maybe. But what the other gospels do, building upon that, I think it's even more telling when a post-resurrection Jesus gets to be on earth even longer and longer and longer. Finally, you get to Acts and you have this 40-day period, and it's like, whoa, what the heck? Why is he here for 40 days now? And like they're elaborating and building on this, what looks to be an early possible just translation-ish type of theme. It depends on what scholar you go to too, because I know Paul he's thinking within the Jewish mindset, but he's also living in a Roman world, and how he's kissing both the Jewish and the Greek Roman ideas, in my opinion, in this are relevant. I don't just exclusively look to the Jewish world to answer everything that Paul's talking about. Of course, I look to it when I think of resurrection, but some of the things that Paul does by having this like apotheosized, divinized Jewish man in the manner that he does is interesting. So you could run to people like Enoch and stuff to try and see if there's any relevance to Enochian type literature in Paul. And then there's other reasons to think Paul's thinking in a Roman mindset as well, because he's dealing with Gentiles who would have probably understood that better. But also he uses language of like Caesar's coming in power, like Jesus is like the Caesar who's coming in power, and political ideas that are relevant to his audience, I think, in the Roman world. So there's so much going on here, but I do think it's very telling that if you can't get the end right, which is why I wanted to start with that, this corporate resurrection only pops up in Matthew where we see any potential literary fulfillment of that by having the zombie apocalypse occur.
That's right,
and then Mike Lacona loses his job because he starts realizing it couldn't have happened. Like, you know what I mean? So he's like, God, that doesn't look like history. Well, what's Matthew doing then? Anyway, that was a ramble of mine. But Paul, do you any thoughts?
Just again on the ending of Mark, the original ending is just, it's not even Jesus. An angel tells two women that Jesus has risen, and then they tell no one because they're afraid, and that's the end. Right. And could Mark have written that ending if stories of Jesus appearing in the flesh to people were already commonplace? It's hard for me to understand that. Yeah,
that feels very strange, right?
That's an interesting observation. Yeah. There's a lot, I think, that the documentary touches on that is really genius, the way that it was put together in many ways. As you said, Kipp, you feel that there could have been a little bit more nuance in the human sacrifice section, I'm sure, but it was still brilliant how it was painted.
There's a lot of things. I mean, scholars are going to look at this and, many people, as we can see, many of our apologist friends have looked at this and poked holes and all sorts of things. But that's just the nature of what this is, right? I can look at this and say, I would have done this differently. I would have set a heavier emphasis on this. I would have made this more clear, or provided more nuance to this or that. But in the end, there's only so much you can do, right?
Right.
And I think the thing that I love about what Satan's Guide has done, I think it's really quite brilliantly identified and targeted its audience. I think it's constructed a compelling story, and I think it's gotten most of it right. That's pretty great in my books.
I thought it was great. Paul, did you think that was did you watch the whole thing?
Oh yeah, I've watched it twice now.
Many times.
Yeah, it kind of hits all the big topics that you discover when you first start taking Bible scholarship seriously, right? And I'm glad it starts with the misconception of Satan right from the beginning, because it's like any Jew will tell you that Satan's not the big bad boogeyman of the Old Testament, the way Christians often misunderstand him. So I think that's a good one. And I don't know if apologists really argue with that one.
Right.
It's so easy to defend.
Have you seen any? I know that you had to have watched several of these. Dr. Kill has such a threshold for listening to various critics of us critics, and like can actually tolerate. I'll have to call him like, all right, so give me the skinny on it. I don't have 2 hours to scratch my head and like miserably sit through some of it. Yeah, it's a gift, man. You have a gift. But like, have any of them taken issue with that initial? That's why my title's triggering. Satan was right. Well, notice in Christian context, those are some fighting words that I just said, and I'm going to get hexed for this, and God's going to damn me, and the whole night. And it's like, well, when I say Satan, I'm speaking about the actor, the cartoon character in the documentary. But then even then, I'm not even talking about this Christian interpretation of Satan. I'm going with the flow of the documentary and saying, actually, just this adversary, like a lawyer, so to speak, and oftentimes doing God's bidding, if anything.
You know, I've seen a number of comments from apologists and from evangelical Christians who are not fans of the documentary on this specific point. And I think like I think it's a brilliant way of telling the story, but I also have noticed that, you know, people have just kind of shut their minds off, right? As soon as they see, well, it's Satan, well, he is the father of lies, and all these things he's telling me, of course they're lies. I already hate critical scholarship. Of course Satan's going to present that to me and tell me it's the truth.
Right.
So, you know,
Good
but
point.
I don't know, like, how do you if you're not generating that kind of consistent criticism, and people aren't, you know, pulling their hair out and losing their minds at what you've done, you know, or I should say, if this is happening, that probably means that you've succeeded in
Right.
in some respect, right?
I guess it depends on the person who might be viewing. Because for me, I was the type of Christian, complete transparency. People like Aaron Ra, who went to Satanist conventions, who dressed up in dark Dracula-looking type of outfits, I'll say, they were the last guys I would have ever even listened to. And if I did, it was to see them debate someone I hoped I cheered for the Christian who was they would never have convinced me. And so this kind of title, Satan's Guide, would have immediately, the kind of fundamentalist I was, just shut off. My brain would not even tolerate going down that path. And I suspect you would be the same. I don't know.
Who, me?
You or Paul? You guys.
So yeah, no, I think that's fair, and I think that explains the reaction of a lot of people. My friend and colleague, Dr. Jennifer Bird, when we did this, we're in the process of reviewing it. Well, not Satan's Guide, but Mike Winger's response to Satan's Guide over on my channel. Right. She made a point of saying that, and I think she's right here, the people who I think probably benefit from this documentary and who will appreciate it the most are those people who are already, you know, on their way down this road to deconstruction.
Right.
And people who take the critical study of the Bible seriously.
Interesting. Paul?
Yeah, I was going to ask what you guys think about the tone of the video. Like, I was talking to a friend of mine and was surprised that his reaction was quite negative, even though he's very similar in his deconstruction to us, I think. But
interesting.
Like, yeah, having Satan as presenter and having this, snarky, sarcastic tone throughout. It's very entertaining, but at the same time, it's going to turn off a lot of people that aren't ready to go very deep on these issues.
No, I think you're right about that. Like when you watch Mike Winger's review of the documentary, he spends some time talking about, just listen to the mockery, listen to the the way that they denigrate the Bible, and I'm, I it's hard because I think for a long time, while I was still a very serious Christian and learning about critical scholarship, maybe one of the things that helped me survive, but also I think was super beneficial just for my own development was developing a sense of humor about the texts, right? I think for a lot of people, they're just incapable of doing that, in large part because of this high commitment, this commitment to these ideas about the Bible being God's word and inerrancy and sola scriptura and all of this. But man, it's sad. Because the Bible can be really funny too, and I think this, a film like this also helps to pull out and tease, some of the things about the literature that's legitimately funny.
I was going to say the same, and I just want to make my observation, which might be different, obviously, than your friends. I am glad a video like this is hammering it hard like this, and yes, including mockery. And I'll say why. What are the most famous ancient satirists in the world named Lucian? He, in a very, very clever way, would sophisticatedly mock and scoff some of the superstitions of the time that were sacred and held as true and whatnot. You need a little bit of both. You need a soft pitch, and you sometimes need to just lay it out there and say, come on. If we had a living religion based on the Greek mythology today, where it's active and such, we'd probably see several people doing exactly what this documentary is doing, based on Heracles or Zeus coming down and raping the whole nine, like crazy stuff that's like documented within it. Because we see that in the Christian authors of the first century. They are mocking the pagans, or at least their worldview, by pointing out how immoral their gods were, how bad their people. Oh, well, look, you can do that and you can dish out. Can you take? Because your own worldview, your own literature is doing this very thing. And so Christians throughout history did this to the Greeks, the Romans, and any other various types of groups that have gone in history. And I think it broke down a lot of people. Plus, there was by the sword, of course, conversions. But I just think that we need a little satire, and this may not be for everybody. But I loved the reverse psychology, because in it, here's the interesting part, and my observation is, the bad guy was right. In my observation, more than not, obviously. And the good guy, being Jesus, the character who's trying to kind of be on the side of these people who are going to the seminaries and teaching at the churches, they're not telling you the full story. And their excuse is, well, these scholars are wrong, and they're biased scholars, and they have propaganda, and they're not accurate with God's word. Mike Winger, for example, how he treats that. No, they're not even in church talking about this in any way. They're avoiding communicating what is being taught there, because they're finding ways, I think, to keep an audience, as the intro to this video talks about with Hector Avalos. By the way, last comment is, and I'll shut up, is Hector Avalos died a few weeks after the first time I ever got to email him about possibly interviewing him on MythVision. And he wrote me back and said, I wish I could speak. I can't talk anymore. The cancer has taken over my throat, but I would love to have joined you on your journey and been part of MythVision. But I won't be alive for much longer. And I wish he was, because that guy was really smart and very gentle.
Indeed. I guess I think we should probably get to the super chats, but I'll just say one more thing on that point is that, and you raise an important point. One of the things that biblical scholars are doing on a regular basis, and one of the things that I in particular really enjoy about looking at the text is the subversive nature of them, where because so much of this literature was produced from places of power and influence and had their own agendas at work, it's super fun. Pulling back the curtain, right? Looking behind and seeing what's there. And that's what we often discover, is that when you carefully comb through these texts and understand where they came from and what they're doing, you start to see that, wow, maybe the good guys really weren't the good guys in the end at all, right? Like maybe like there's this whole other world behind the text that we just don't know anything about, but we have to sort of tease out through the way the Bible presents people like the Canaanites, people like the Ha'arits, the people of the land who were practicing their own local folk religions that Josiah was determined to end. Right? Like it's there's all these counter narratives, and half the fun of this is discovering those and seeing those and figuring out how this stuff all fits together.
Paul, you want me to go ahead and hit these supers?
Go ahead.
Awesome. Seth of Valhalla, thanks for super chatting. Could it be Satan? Best church lady voice. Thank you so much, Seth. Appreciate that. Is it Hammond? Forgive me if Hammond. I probably butchered that. Thank you so much for the super chat. What do Greeks call their cars? Geration station?
Generation station. I'm not sure I get it, but I'll laugh.
I don't even get this one either. And so God said to Pharaoh, Wallo? Walolo?
Walolo.
It's like a taunting noise.
Thank you so much. Seth is back again. Rabbi Singer recently asserted ancient Hebrews were part of the Phoenicians' purple people. Archaeology evidence for this? I think Phoenicians and Canaanites are the same. It's just one's earlier.
Purple was an old etymology for Canaanite, but I don't think it's really held these days.
Okay. Interesting.
No.
Thank you so much. Discovering Ancient History with Pat Lowinger. Find and replace your right as the winning nation. I think this is back when
that's what the that's a good summary of what's happening in the conquest
Bible
narratives and the development of this national idea, right? Over and against the Canaanites.
Right. It's a foundation myth of constructing the history of your nation and all that. Exactly. Pat Lowinger, again, thank you for the super chat. Genealogies were important for diplomatic reasons as well. First Maccabees 12:20-23 is a perfect example. Jews and Spartans both descended from Abraham. Great point, my friend. Because that's actually what happened.
Just to clarify what Pat's getting at here, at the time when a text like First Maccabees was written, it was important to it was more important for the leaders, the rulers in the Hasmonean kingdom to have to develop a closer relationship, a stronger tie to the Spartan myth, right? So genealogies serve these sorts of purposes.
Yeah, well put. Chris Moore, probably a subject for another day. Any reason as to why we don't have knowledge of world history before the collapse of the Bronze Age?
Well, actually, I would say we have, this is one of the things, right? We actually have quite a bit of information about what was going on in the 200 or 300 years leading up to the Bronze Age collapse, and that's really why so many scholars, started to focus on what on earth happened, because you had all this information, then all of a sudden things kind of went crazy, and there's this vacuum, right? So, no, it's certainly there, and it's the Egyptians have piles and piles of texts which provide us information about it. So do the Hittites. Virtually all of our Hittite literature comes from this period, just prior to the Bronze Age collapse. So yeah, it's certainly there.
Thank you so much. Feel free to chime in anytime, Paul. I don't want to cut you off. No
problem.
Big boy. Greetings, Satan's scholars. Does the Sennacherib's annals count as valid independent corroboration for Hezekiah's war?
I would say certainly independent corroboration of the conflict that occur, but as with the biblical account, you have to also read Sennacherib's recounting of the same events with a careful eye, right? But there's certainly enough there that you can make sense of a number of things that occur within the biblical text. I'm not entirely sure if that's where you were going with the question, big boy, but yeah, I certainly think it works.
Thank you. Dava, thank you for the super chat. Bernard B. Was Daniel 12:9 used to explain why nobody knew about these prophecies before?
I don't know it offhand. Are you looking it up? Okay.
Oh, I see. When the angel says, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are to remain secret and sealed until the time of the end." I think that's a fairly common trope in apocalyptic literature, where the message is sealed to the end, so you're just now finding out about it in the second century BC.
I think this is interesting to point out, right? When approximately does this author think Daniel is writing? In the Babylonian transition into Persia, correct? Like 500s-ish BCE.
Yeah, right.
So we're dealing with from the 500s BCE, and I want people to travel with me for a second about the whole failed apocalypse thing that I was talking about. 500 BCE, let's just say roughly 600 years. Between that and Jesus, I'm going to say 500 to 600 years of time, really, to the 2nd century BC. So we're really talking 490 years, which is why he brings up 490. But he's talking about until the end, right? Then the book of Revelation comes up, and in the last chapter of Revelation, he says, "Seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is..." Oh, no, do not. Sorry. He says, don't seal up. So Daniel's saying seal up the time, till the end. Revelation saying don't seal it up. The time is near. So we have Revelation saying things are about to happen. And if Daniel's saying seal it up, or the angel's telling Daniel seal it up, because it's the end is a little ways off, right? It's 490 years. I'm saying we're 2,000 years removed from Revelation, and he's saying the time is soon. I mean, it had to have happened or it failed. And this is the point about the language of the New Testament, why it had to have failed, unless you want to spiritualize and do all sorts of other crazy interpretations to make it fulfilled as full preterists do, or partial preterists in some ways, but mainly full preterists. Do you get what I'm trying to get at here?
Yeah,
Daniel says seal it up.
I think
490
so.
years.
Yeah.
It's a ways off. Revelation says don't seal it up. The time is near. We're 2,000 years
Right.
removed.
Yes.
Daniel's
No,
500 years.
I see. Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, I get that. Yeah. No, that makes good sense. And I think that there's some traction there.
Yeah. I think we're going to agree, but it dawned on me as I was still a Christian hearing this going, Daniel's saying, seal it up, or the angel's saying to Daniel, seal it up till the end, which means it's a ways off. And he mentions 490 years. Revelation, this angel tells John, don't seal up the words. The time is at hand. Soon. He will not tarry. He's about to come. Well, if Daniel wants him to seal it up, and that's 500 years, and we're 2,000 years from Jesus, conclusions?
I think this kind of language, too, it's a genre convention. It builds excitement in the reader. It's not always to be taken hyper literally.
I get it, but that's in the opening of Revelation says the things written in, you're going to document these things, for they are going to happen soon. Like these things you're documenting are supposed to happen soon. And I just read Bart Ehrman's Apocalypse as well, like the book where he goes through the various apocalyptic literature and all of this, how it failed. I thought it was quite convincing, was already speaking a lot of stuff I knew, but interesting stuff I never heard that he goes over as well. And I just see the beginning and end of Revelation telling you this sandwich of things, repetitive in symbolic language often, about things that were supposed to happen soon to Rome. And of course, Jerusalem plays a part in Revelation 11. But anyway, is the find of an Ugaritic parallel to Adam and Eve legit in German? And there's a Wikipedia.
Yeah, I don't. I feel like I should know it, and I don't. So I'm sorry, I haven't had the chance to look into this.
I'd love to look for stuff like that, like seeing those connections and stuff, especially with Mesopotamian literature. As far as Joshua Bowen's documented some of this, but then there's other scholars.
Like I said, it's not something that I'm unfortunately have spent the time looking into, but I appreciate you sticking that on my radar, and I will certainly take some time to look at this in the future.
Thank you.
Sorry.
HD Drake, thank you for the super sticker. Michael Beverly, good to see Michael Beverly here. Love you guys. Got to go. If y'all don't mind, could you give my stream with Dr. Bird tomorrow, 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, a plug? We're chatting about belief. Loved her talk with Derek, and I'm following up on a few things I was curious about.
Nice.
So is his YouTube channel just called Michael Beverly?
It's just called Michael Beverly. He's been he's just come across my radar recently. He actually just became a patron of mine too.
Ooh.
But he did an interview with Mike Lacona, which was really good, and he did like a insane 5.5 hour stream with Rob Rowe from Sentinel Apologetics, and managed to stay awake through the whole thing. So, but he does some things that are really good. There's some stuff over there that I like. So yes, everybody should check that out tomorrow. And of course, Dr. Jennifer Bird is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, just go and watch her.
Go watch her. Go show support. I put the link in the comment section, I believe. Making sure, yes, right here. I appreciate the super chat, Michael, and I hope people will go subscribe and check out your stream with her. Aaron Colson, in the Exodus story, why make it Egypt? Even to present day, what is the fascination with Egypt, Dr. Kipp? What's the next episode of Diablo Critics?
Diablo Critics. Diablo Critics is coming on March 17th, 11 o'clock Pacific time. And whatever that is in all the other time zones, we will be live. And we're just gonna pick up with where we left off in Mike Winger's review of Satan's Guide to the Bible. So, but we'll finish it, and then we're gonna move on to something else for April. As for the Exodus story, why make it Egypt? I think that there's a couple of things at work here. I think that there is legitimately some sort of historical cultural memory at work here, as we discussed a little bit. I believe that there likely were people living in the region who had experienced some sort of migration of some kind out of Egypt in the first place. So there's that. Egypt was still, even though during most of the Iron Age, the Assyrians were the dominant power in the region, Egypt was still there. And they were still at times an important ally, but also at times with whom the people had border conflicts, so there was still this ongoing interest there with Egypt. And then I think by the time you get to I think but I think that's enough, right? Like I would suggest that at the time many of these stories started to emerge, there was already some sort of historical connection to a deliverance of some sort, or an emergence of some sort out of the kingdom of Egypt.
Paul, did you want to add a comment? Because I could lay something out and get your thoughts. I mentioned it earlier, but
Kipp said it well. I would just mention that so much of the iconography of the Israelite and Jerusalem kings, has Egyptian iconography on it. They've got scarab seals and all that stuff. So obviously they felt the presence and influence of Egypt all throughout the history of Israel. And there could have been so many reasons to want to associate themselves with Egypt in one way or another, both positive and negative.
Yeah, and it makes me kind of wonder too about, I know that we're so involved in like tackling apologists who want to nail it to the 15th century and 12th century and do all these things to like really pin it down. And I kind of want to ignore that, swipe it to the side, and just say, could there have been a memory of the Hyksos kind of expulsion that played some traumatic historical word of mouth thing in which Israelites adopt that theme in some way, spin it into their own message? I don't know. I mean, there's no way to know it didn't, right? So is Jan Osman, who recently passed away, touching on something here? Could it be that the Hyksos narrative, or not narrative, but that what happened with the Hyksos still had word of mouth storytelling passing down to where these guys in the highlands of Canaan ended up adopting it as their own story? And yes, they also are influenced by Egypt. And it had a powerful punch, narrative-wise, to forming their own people. I mean, who really knows? I mean, ultimately, but it's a fun guessing game, in my opinion. And yeah, and Egypt is exotic, by the way. That's just another interesting thing to say. Why fascinated with Egypt?
Too, right?
Yeah, very exotic. And the pyramids. I mean,
it's not, and this is something too that is not like this isn't just a modern thing. The ancient people were, like the ancient non-Egyptian people, were also fascinated by Egypt. It just it was rightly, it's one of the oldest, longest standing continuous civilizations, right? By the time you get to the end of the Bronze Age. So yeah.
This is how we know that their gods are real, because, of course, they wouldn't have lasted this long. And clearly, thank you so much, Aaron. Aaron Crawford. So, did Satan get a bad rap or not?
Are we talking about the biblical Satan here?
I would imagine this is about the show. I would imagine, but I could be wrong. I'm just guessing. Here we are, interpreting words. What do you think? Obviously, a Christian apologist would say, terrible.
He deserved it, right? Yeah. I mean, so, but I think, I'll just say, if we're talking about the biblical Satan, I would say he got a bad rep. I mean, mostly just because he's such a nobody in, the Hebrew Bible, until you get to the New Testament, and all of a sudden he's like the consummate bad guy, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron.
That's what you get for just doing your job.
Oh, did you want to say something with that, Paul?
Not really, but just to add there, when Revelation really makes Satan the bad guy, there's not enough Old Testament material to go on, so he conflates Satan with Leviathan, the old Canaanite.
There you go, right? Yeah.
And if anyone wants to watch a video on Leviathan, I think, Kipp, you touch on this, but there's a documentary that Paul did recently on Leviathan. And man, you got to watch that. I'll try to share it in the comments so that you can go subscribe. If you haven't already, what are you doing?
Awesome.
It's Bible's oldest creation story, of course, is the name of it. Leviathan and Yahweh's conquest over the sea. This is Paul's video. All 602 of you, as far as I could tell, watching. Please, I beg of you, click on it. Go subscribe to Paul and Kipp. I'm putting the link to Kipp's channel too. I ask if there's any mods, please repost these while we're still live so people will grab them, subscribe. They're in the description of this video as well. A couple more guys, and then I'll let you go. Oh, sorry, did I get Marco? Marco says, thanks for the cool stream. Dr. Kipp is my favorite. Laugh out loud. Sorry.
Thanks, Marco.
What the hell, Marco? I'm just kidding. I don't blame him. Thank you so much. 21st century Christian, as a Hebrew Bible scholar, do you think that we'll ever see an eclectic text of the Hebrew Bible in our lifetime, like Nestle Allen's New Testament?
I mean, I think that's what the Oxford Hebrew Bible Project is trying to do, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I am, but I always assume that's sort of the goal of the Hebrew Bible Project, but I don't know. I've always kind of preferred just using standardized Masoretic text, BHS, just because it's easy. Sorry, but yeah,
easy path. Thank you so much, 21st century. And then Ronan of Stag, thank you for the super sticker, my friend. I hope everybody's enjoyed the little hangout. I was thinking of, for the future, doing a more extensive, just watching the whole thing and pausing along the way and commenting, because there's so many nuggets in the documentary to like discuss and pull out and go further on. That's my problem. I don't know if you relate, Paul and Kipp. Like, I'll watch Paulogia do a video. He'll start doing something with something, and I'm like, yes. And then I'm thinking of like 5 things that I could add. But because in a video, you can only do so much at that moment.
Yeah.
There's so much you could add to it, or things, ideas they give you that you didn't think about for a minute. And you kind of want to do that. I'm sure there's plenty in the documentary. So shameless plug time. This is where we absolutely show how selfish we are and that we do not give a hoot. So we're going to speak our minds, but what we have coming up. Oh, we did get one more popping in. Serious question to Paul. Is the Smart Fool the best mod?
Yeah, Stevie. This is because we're both moderators at the Academic Biblical subreddit, but I will say the
awesome.
Smart Fool is at least the second best mod.
There you go.
Mormon to Mormon is pretty good too.
Thank you for the super chat. I actually read, by the way, in case you're wondering, the Smart Fool. I think this is the Smart Fool that we did responses with Dennis. And I actually read your writing criticizing, at least trying to, I'm not going to say criticizing, but you were trying to go in and see if Dennis's work was possible or not possible. And I appreciate the fairness I think you dealt with, even though I felt at times it was pedantic, in my opinion. It was still fun to read. And I sent it to Dennis. Dennis has several book projects he's working on right now. And so I'm certain he probably hasn't read it. But if he does, I'm hoping we can do a review and talk about it and like break apart. I think like half of that one you wrote is like just addressing stuff like the language and could the author have known these things and would they have known these things? And then how do we dive into that? So it's off the top of my head. I read it like 3 months ago or something when I finally went back on Reddit for 1 second. I never go on there.
Can I just put in an extra plug? If you use Reddit, the Academic Biblical subreddit is really good. Lots of really smart scholars there. And I think BART EHRMAN's even going to be there on March 7th doing a Q&A.
Awesome. Interesting. Really cool. Okay, shameless plug, guys. So you just shamelessly plugged, see? So let's shamelessly plug our way through this, and then I'll get this last super chat here. Dr. Kill, what do you have coming up other than murder?
So I'm going to go live again this week, I think on Wednesday afternoon. So it'll probably be Wednesday afternoon, to discuss why apologists shouldn't make arguments from languages that they don't understand to make bad points that they want to make. So
sounds like fun.
I'll be doing that. And then I think that's, yeah. So I'll be doing that Wednesday. On Thursday night, as always, Dr. Josh and I are doing our bi-weekly Hebrew reading stream, Kiryat Brit. We just finished First Kings, and it was a smashing good time. We are moving on to the book of Jeremiah this Thursday, either chapter 1 or chapter 29, but probably chapter 1. So there's that. And then, of course, on March the 17th, Sunday, at 11 o'clock a.m. Pacific time, I will be joined by my good friends, Dr. Josh, Dr. Matt Monger, Dr. Jennifer Bird, Dr. Dan McClellan, and David McDonald for episode 2 of Diablo Critics. We will finish our review of Mike Winger's review of Satan's Guide to the Bible, and please come with your questions and we will answer them. If I could just plug one other thing. I mean, there's the course on MVP Courses. Please check it out. I have a Patreon, which helps me to continue doing this kind of thing. In the moment right now, what I'm really trying to work on in earnest is to finish up the book that I am currently writing, which is based on the course, but massively expanded, and I think in many ways improved. I have actually set up a direct donation link that you can click on if you're just if you don't want to donate, if you don't want to join the Patreon or buy the course, but you want to support my work, you can do so directly. So Derek has that link, and he put it in the video description. So, and that's so that I can keep writing and get this thing done soon, right? So and that's
like
it.
a day is
So-
as 1,000 years, or like I mean,
ideally, I'd like to get it done inside of the next 2 or 3 months. I know
okay.
I had originally said March, but it's March now, and I'm like half done. So.
Okay. So we can actually take you at your word when you say soon. You mean okay. I just wanted to make sure that you did better than the biblical authors when you said soon what you meant. Paul,
Derek.
tell us, all that's in the description. What do you got coming up, my friend?
Well, I don't do live streams, so I don't have a lot to plug. My next video will be out soonish about the golden calf stories in the Bible, and that's a really tough one to untangle.
Ooh.
That
Yeah,
sounds
and
amazing.
I love that story. I can't wait to see how you do it. Because just wait, Kipp. Wait till you see some of his videos.
Me too.
The script was kicking my butt. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you, Paul, and of course, Kipp. I think both of you, and then Dr. Joshua Bowen before Kent stole him away from us. I don't blame him. It's East Coast, so it's pretty late over there. Thank you for everybody who's tuned in. If you are interested in seeing a long, actually going through the documentary type of one, that would probably be 4 or 5 hour long stream, because it's 1.5 hours, just the documentary itself, and the pauses to comment. Let us know. Comment down below if you've gotten this far that you'd be interested in something like a hangout and watching the documentary from start to finish, because there's much, much more we did not cover that is discussed in it. Any final words from you, gentlemen?
No. Did you want to do that last super chat before we go? Lady Wasp is one of
thank you for catching that.
So she's one of my patrons, and she's a big supporter of mine too.
Okay.
So I'll just read it. Dr. Kipp, would you please explain again about Moloch not being a god and some kind of sacrifice? Jehovah's Witnesses and some ex-Jehovah's Witnesses like to think otherwise. Thank you. So importantly, I need to point out that this is not universally held by scholars. I don't know if this is a majority or a minority opinion, but I think this is an idea that certainly if it's not already the dominant view, is gaining a lot of traction. So basically, we have a handful of these texts throughout the Hebrew Bible. It's mentioned in Leviticus in particular. It's mentioned by Jeremiah. There's a handful of other places about, how the sons of Israel, how the people should not offer it. It says you shall not offer your sons or make them pass through the fires, lemolk, or as is often translated, to Molech. It was long assumed that this was a specific type of offering, this child sacrifice to a specific deity named Molech. Problematically, there is no evidence on the ground anywhere for a deity of this name named Molech. The other side of this this situation is that there are also a handful of texts from outside the Hebrew Bible, from around the ancient Near East in particular. I think it's at Ugarit and in I'm probably going to get this wrong. There's Akkadian text. Let me just say that where this exact same term is used, mulk. However, and it's used in the same way as what we see in the biblical texts, and associated with this ritual of child sacrifice. So the natural conclusion to draw from this is that it's just the same thing that's taking place in the biblical text, and that the term lemolech is actually lemolch. It's actually describing a type of offering, very similar to like a mincha or a silomim, or some of these types of sacrifice that we see in some of the ancient Israelite literature. One of the distinctions that I make in my course about Israelite religion when talking about sacrifice is that there's two different things going on. You have in terms of sacrifice, you have elements. So that's whether you're offering grains or wine or an animal or a human being. So on the one hand, you have elements, but then you also have types of sacrifice. Be that, like I said, a peace offering or a Thanksgiving offering, or the Pesach is a type of sacrifice, right? So different types of sacrifices can use different types of elements. So I think that's what we have going on here, where the lemolch is a type of sacrifice, and specifically it seems to, just use this element of children. All right.
There you go. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then Mr. Monster becoming 21 months as a member of MythVision. This was a fun stream. Hell, Satan. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate the love, everybody. Awesome. I really appreciate it. And looking forward to possibly doing the long stream. Don't go anywhere, gentlemen. And have